So our next briefing will focus on the issue of hydraulic fracturing and the waste produced from the fracking process, and a proposed bill in New York State to address that issue. So if everybody's ready.
Good morning. My name is Claire Van Zuiden, and I am incredibly honored to be presenting on behalf of my entire team and our faculty advisor, Professor Steve Cohen, on the implementation of New York State Senate Bill 6892, High Volume Hydraulic Fracturing Waste Tracking Program. So today I'm going to discuss a little bit about what hydraulic fracturing is, as well as the controversy and what's currently happening in New York State. I will also discuss the problems addressed by Senate Bill 6892, how the program will be implemented, a little bit about who will be carrying out the program, what its costs are, and finally our timeline for the first year. So what is the controversy? Well, by now I'm sure the majority of you have heard the term hydraulic fracturing or fracking, whether it's from anti-fracking billboards, pro-gas drilling commercials, or reading about its energy potential in the news. Hydraulic fracturing has become an important energy buzzword in the United States, and rightfully so, because at current consumption rates, the United States has estimated that we have enough natural gas for another 100 years of supply. Yet there's controversy in deciding whether or not to drill for natural gas. Those that are in support claim that it is beneficial for jobs and for energy independence, and those that are opposed are concerned with the environmental and health risks. So what exactly is hydraulic fracturing? Well, hydraulic fracturing is a drilling technique that uses large volumes of water, sand, and chemicals that are then pressurized and then injected underground in order to break up the shale rock formations and release the natural gas. The natural gas, along with a portion of that fluid, returns back to the surface, and it is that fluid that needs to be stored, transported, and then disposed. The recent dramatic increase of hydraulic fracturing in the United States is due to technological advancements that have allowed the industry to drill horizontally in order to access more shale rock and therefore more natural gas. So what's currently happening in New York? Well, New York is home to one of the largest concentrations of shale rock, the Marcellus Shale, which is located in the southern tier of the state along the Pennsylvania border. However, due to the controversy surrounding hydraulic fracturing, New York has had a moratorium on fracking since August 2010. This was done in order to conduct further research on the potential of toxic chemicals contaminating ground and surface water, which could potentially cause environmental and health risks. Governor Cuomo continues to receive pressure from both industry and environmentalists to decide whether to lift the moratorium or to ban hydraulic fracturing for the long term. However, with this moratorium in place, New York has the opportunity to ensure that the process is done as safely as possible before the moratorium is lifted, unlike other states such as Pennsylvania and Ohio, who have engaged in fracking with very little regulation. As a group, we hold that Senate Bill 6892 is a crucial piece of the necessary regulation to help mitigate these environmental and health risks, as well as help mitigate the controversy. So what exactly is New York State Senate Bill 6892? Well, this bill focuses on the fracturing fluid, or polluting waste that returns back to the surface. Of the millions of gallons of water, sand, and chemicals that get injected underground, approximately 1/3 return back to the surface, and it is that fluid that is regulated under Senate Bill 6892. This bill specifically establishes a waste tracking system for that fluid that returns to the surface and mandates its disclosure, as this fluid contains chemicals that can cause negative health effects, including cancer and respiratory problems. However, this bill does not address the remaining 2/3 of the fluid that remains underground, and this will likely need to be addressed by New York in the future with further regulation. Thus, this bill just represents a piece of the necessary regulation in order to improve drilling practices within New York State. So how are we going to implement this program? Well, in order to carry out Senate Bill 6892, we're operating under the assumption that the bill has passed and that the moratorium will be lifted after the proper regulations are in place. Per the stipulation of the bill, we established a program that will be adopted and performed by the Department of Environmental Conservation, or the DEC. And we constructed the program in such a way to anticipate the potential growth of the drilling industry within New York. The 4 necessary tasks to execute the program are as follows: waste permitting, storage duration, compliance inspections, and finally, tracking, reporting, and auditing. So our first aspect is waste permitting. In conjunction with the drilling permit that was already required by the DEC prior to the moratorium, we propose implementing a waste generation permit that will be issued prior to drilling and injection in order to ensure that the waste is stored safely. The DEC will collect, quantify, and report on any non-compliant drilling operators. Our second aspect is storage duration. After the shale gas is fractured, a portion of the fluid returns back to the surface, and it is this fracturing fluid that is initially stored on site, similar to containers here shown in yellow. Through drilling operator self-reporting, storage duration of the fluid will be limited to 30 days in order to reduce the likelihood of accidents on site. And our third aspect is compliance inspections. In order to ensure that the flowback fluid generated is properly stored on site, the program incorporates 1 scheduled and 1 random inspection per well per year that will be carried out by the DEC. And finally, tracking, reporting, and auditing. After the fluid is stored on site for up to 30 days, the waste will be transported and disposed at a waste treatment facility. Senate Bill 6892 requires that the flowback fluid generated from hydraulic fracturing be tracked through a manifest system, from the point of generation to the point of disposal. The manifest, in the form of a document, will travel with the generated flowback fluid until it reaches a waste treatment facility. In order to streamline the data for collection for digital records, the document will include a barcode that will be scanned at each stage of disposal and will be sent to the DEC to be uploaded for public access. So who will implement this program? Well, as mentioned previously, the Department of Environmental Conservation will implement the program. In order to carry out the program, we propose a regional approach to hiring 9 new staff members at the DEC, specifically focused on those regions that include the Marcellus Shale. We plan to hire 1 position to oversee the 5 new staff members in both permitting and auditing, as well as 3 staff positions for inspection. However, since this is a relatively new industry and the department will be implementing a new set of regulation, we also recommend hiring outside contracted staff for the first year for training and initiation, as well as university partners that will be utilized for their expertise in compliance and inspections. So how much is this all going to cost? Well, based on our estimates, the program will more than pay for itself within the first year. This is important because it will not burden New York taxpayers and will even create $10.8 million in additional funds. So what do our total operating costs look like? Well, these will include new staffing positions, hiring outside contractors and university partners, as well as travel for personnel to well sites and materials for carrying out the manifest tracking process. In order to cover these costs and generate funds, we made conservative estimations for revenue generation from both permits and from fines for those operators who are not in compliance. So what's our first year timeline? Well, since we're assuming that Senate Bill 6892 has passed and that the moratorium in New York has been lifted, we will begin our approved program design in January 2013. For all 4 aspects of our program, we will have a ramp-up period of hiring and training that will take place within the first 4 to 5 months. Following this will be the implementation period, in which the DEC will begin to issue permits, monitor and report the waste tracking program, and maintain the manifest database. This is the hydraulic fracturing waste tracking program and its implementation. Like the citizens of New York, our group recognizes that hydraulic fracturing can cause risks to ecosystems and human health. But we also understand that drilling can provide jobs, state revenue, energy independence, and a potential departure away from fuels that emit greater greenhouse gas emissions. However, we also believe that in order to realize these benefits from hydraulic fracturing, proper regulation needs to be in place in order to ensure that the process is done as safely as possible. Senate Bill 6892 is a piece of the necessary regulation that will establish a waste tracking system to monitor the fracturing fluid that returns to the surface and mandate the disclosure of its composition and disposal. This is a landmark piece of legislation that has the ability to help reach compromise amongst industry and environmentalists, as well as set precedent for improved drilling practices throughout the United States, in order for us to utilize our nation's energy resources while protecting environmental and community health. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Claire. That was really well done.
Thank you.
So regarding the storage duration, you mentioned that it's going to be self-regulated. Is the 30-day time frame or deadline, what's the incentive for these companies? Is that the tracking program you mentioned?
Yeah, so the idea is like many states, funding is an issue, and so we thought that we would have one scheduled and one random inspection, and so that way that one random inspection would hopefully incentivize industry to limit that storage duration to 30 days. We're asking them to report when the waste leaves the site and to ensure that it's done under 30 days. However, we can't come out every 30 days to ensure that just due to funding limitations.
Thanks.
In your first year timeline, I can understand why you're hiring contractors. Why are you hiring university partners?
Best place to hire people.
So we thought that university partners, well, since this is a relatively new industry, we thought that university partners would have the expertise and the scientific background and knowledge that could help out those employees that we hire at the DEC. And so we would use their scientific research and knowledge for the actual waste tracking process.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
I have one question about the budget.
Okay.
I think it might be a language barrier, but you said that you have costs and then you have revenues and you have revenues. So I guess I have two questions. So revenues, is that like profits, and is it basically self-funded then?
So basically, it's not necessarily profits. I mean, it is to a certain extent, but it's not going to be this program getting that money. It will go to the state, and then it will be up to the state's allocation to decide what they do with the $10.8 million that we have anticipated to be generated from the first year. And then in terms of, I'm sorry, your second question?
So it's basically self-funded?
Yes, yeah. So basically the idea would be is, of course, there would be the upfront cost of hiring people before we would actually get any sort of revenue from fines or from permits. And then the process would probably take place a little bit slowly because in order for the moratorium to be lifted, and then all the wells have to come back onto site and they need permits. And so we sort of anticipate that the first year would be that amount based on the number of wells that were initially in operation before the moratorium was put in place, which was about 13,000.
Okay, before we take a break, I just want to explain one factor you'll learn in financial management next semester, which is that you can generate revenues from a program. That doesn't mean the program gets it. It's a separate process for having the budget allocated. The case they were making here was that this program would generate more revenues than it would cost, but the state could still decide not to give them as much money because they might want to give it to universities for their own research. Or for fellowships for MPA students at Columbia, or any number of other good things that we could have them do.